having any slides here today, but I figured with such a short amount of time, rather than trying to like go really deep into any one particular thing that I've worked on or am working on, just to kind of take the moment to reflect on my experience working in this area. And I also want to start by saying what an honor it is to get this award as the second, I guess just the second person to get this award. And the first person was my primary advisor, Sue Donarski. And to get it to have Brian be the one to actually hand the award to me. Brian was also my first advisor in graduate school and a member of my committee. So to me, that just speaks to the sense that AEFP really is a family, and it's a place where I feel like, a place where people know my work, but they also know who I am as a person. So it's just really heartwarming. Okay, so what the heck had I done with myself in my career, and why am I getting this thing? Okay, so my research is focused on higher education policy, primarily on financial aid policy, as well as other barriers to college access and success, and on thinking about post-college outcomes and what factors influence those. And I've tried to have a policy impact in all of the places, all of the topics that I study. That's really what motivates me to do my research. I think there's complementarities in the different disciplinary approaches to a given research topic. Those who are really focused on thinking about the theoretical or the methodological aspects of a problem. And I draw upon that work really heavily in my own work. But what is bringing me to my work is trying to have a policy impact, trying to understand what policy makers need and how I can help contribute to that. So I'll talk about briefly, I guess, the three policy areas that I'm kind of most proud of the work that I've done. One of those is around simplifying the financial aid application process. This work started with Sue Donarski when I was a graduate student, where we just did some simulation analyses on the actual formula that students file this huge long form, and it goes into a formula that calculates their aid eligibility, and we basically coded up this whole formula and just started throwing out pieces of it to see how much that would change what somebody was expected to get. And bottom line found, you could throw out like 90% or more of the elements of this form and still predict how much somebody would get in Pell Grant, how much they would be eligible for student loans and so forth. And so that was something I worked on, 2006, and was, over the course of the years, was able to testify to the US Senate 3 times on that topic, including in November of 2020. And they actually, made some changes around that, which is really exciting. I think it kind of remains a little bit to be seen. Will it be like this huge thing that really radically changes everything? But it's nice to see the incremental progress that's been made along those lines. The second area is around remedial placement policies in community colleges. A lot of work has been done on remediation. I've contributed to that literature too, just on what the impact of remediation is and assignment to remediation, and a lot of questioning about what's the value of having so many students placed into remedial education courses at the start of their college career. I went into this work, and the question that I had was, well, what do we know about like the process by which you end up getting placed in these courses to begin with? And what do we know about these exams? And there really hadn't been much work done on that. So I started looking into these placement exams and trying to understand how predictive they actually were of students' college performance. And what I found was they really weren't very predictive at all. Even if you went to the test, test makers and their manuals, and they would say like, don't use this as the only thing that you're using to make decisions. And they had these huge error bars around the numbers that they were coming up with. And many of these exams are very, very short. So, you're going to try to learn a lot about somebody in 20 minutes while they're maybe, bouncing baby on their lap trying to take this test. They're not bad, I guess, in that context, but they're not great if you're, setting somebody on a course that could have really big implications for their college future. So the work that I did in that area basically showed that a lot of students were being placed into remediation, even though it looked like they could do just fine in college level work, had they not been placed there. So that kind of contributed to some reforms around remedial placement and the delivery of remediation. Are there ways to support students to succeed in college level coursework without kind of pushing them, setting them back to start with, and keeping them out of college level courses? And then third, most recently, some work that I have done, just descriptive work, documenting really devastating gaps in student loan repayment outcomes by race. So looking at the black-white gap in student loan default rates using Department of Education data, which show that a lot of the research up to this point had really focused on average amounts of student debt, and how those have changed over time, and earnings relative to debt, and how that's changed over time. I took a focus on default rates, so the likelihood that somebody would default on their student loan debt, really due to just data that hadn't been available before. So I kind of jumped on that. And what that analysis showed was not only that default rates had risen dramatically over time for all students, and were really concentrated among students who had relatively low amounts of debt, but the racial disparities, particularly the black-white gap, was not just large, it was really shockingly and devastatingly large. And to the point that a black college graduate had more exposure, more likelihood of experiencing a student loan default over the next decade or so than a white student who dropped out of college. So in the 1 or maybe 2 minutes that I have left, just to reflect a little bit on that work, those 3 topics, the things that had an impact, none of those were causal studies. I have done quasi-experimental studies in my work. I'm currently working on an RCT, but none of these pieces, they were all quantitative, but none of them used causal methods. And so I think a lesson that I take from that is and also the piece that Brian talked about yesterday, this shapeless liver. Shapeless liver, that's another paper. It's a different one. The Shapeless River, which was about kind of how the structures of college decision-making, these small things can potentially shift students dramatically and affect their likelihood of success. That was, as Brian said, that was not published in a journal, eventually did come up as a book chapter, but it was kind of a think piece. It was like a literature review, a think piece. And I think we don't do enough of that sort of stuff in this field if we want to really impact policy. We need to not just do those individual studies, but like Dominique was saying earlier, kind of have situational awareness of what is going on in the field more broadly, where the holes are, what questions are not being asked. And then I guess the other last thing that I will end with, reflecting on that literature, many of the work that, many of the studies that I've referenced have a theme of these kind of small features of program and policy design potentially having really big consequences for effectiveness. And if that's the case, if we think that these little small details of design matter, then what does it mean for policy and research if our own communities are not super representative? I'm sorry, I'm like running out of breath, I think from the altitude, but I'm not sure. If our own communities are not representative of those communities that we're seeking to serve and studying, how can we be confident that our own personal experiences will give us the insights that we need to know what those little barriers might be, what those obstacles might be, what those missing questions might be? And so just to reveal one final bit about my own, reflect on my own personal experience, writing about FAFSA simplification. I never filed a FAFSA. Writing about community colleges, I never went to one. Writing about student loan debt, I don't have any. So I think it's important as researchers and policymakers that we get more comfortable thinking about just what does that mean? What does my own personal perspective that I bring mean for the research that I do? Hopefully it doesn't mean that I can't have an impact in these areas or can't have things to say on these areas, but I think it does hopefully give me some humility, give me some appreciation for those who do have that experience for qualitative work on the ground, folks who are out there understanding implementation, understanding lived experiences, and just having an open-mindedness and being a good listener. And that's where I'll end it. Thank you.